Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Your Kitchen podcast. As ever, thank you very much for joining me. So today's episode is going to be a design walkthrough of this beautiful kitchen I'm about to show you. I worked with a couple of homeowners based in West Midlands, and this is their second home now, so they're upsizing, so they wasn't sure what to do from a storage perspective because it's still just the both of them, and they didn't want to just overcrowd the space with lots of cabinets, but equally wanted to use the space to optimise functionality, but also obviously look beautiful as well. And also not go, too over budget, because I mean, when you're moving into a property and it's a doer-upper, there's so many different factors to think about when it's not just the kitchen. So we wanted to make sure that they were getting a quality kitchen, but we wanted to make sure as well that they weren't just going overboard on cost. So I will sort of talk through ways of how we manage that as well from a cabinetry perspective. Something that was really prevalent with this design, and it was a bit of a nightmare one to design purely because of the shape of the room. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this, but if you're listening, I'll just talk through the shape. It's got sort of two sections to it. So you've got the main sort of kitchen diner section, and it's actually a really, is a really decent size to work with. And then coming off sort of the side of it, sort of at a right angle and then back across to the right, they had sort of a little conservatory bit almost, but we didn't know how to sort of interlink those two spaces. There was a case as well where they've got a pillar that comes into the room. So again, from a design perspective, that added a couple of design parameters that we needed to be made aware of. It was a load-bearing sort of pillar as well. So then from a cost perspective, it would have been too much to try and take that out. And sometimes, you can't take off the load-bearing, like you have to work with it because obviously you need your house to stay up. So that's why I thought this one would be a particularly great one to showcase to you guys. If there's anybody listening that's like, oh my God, Faye, we're having a nightmare with our design at the minute. I just can't see the vision. I can't figure out, how to use this space. What I'll do is I'll just talk you through sort of what was there existing, and then just talk you through the design sort of features that we've added, but also tips on the actual layout and how we managed to overcome a lot of the like the pillar and just the shape of the room, and making sure that it's coherent between the two spaces. So again, if you're watching, you'll see I've popped the before photos out for you so you can see what that looks like. And actually, when you're looking at the space, it's a fairly modern kitchen. It's got white gloss doors, they're slab, they've got stainless steel bar handles. You've got an angled cooker hood, induction hob, laminate worktops. And then the way that they did it in the previous design was they had almost like a U-shape kitchen going all the way round. They had their towers sort of at the one end of that U-shape next to the pillar. And then they had a peninsula that came out from that pillar next to the oven to have like a sort of like a seating section with a few more cabinets on. And then behind the seating section, they had a bank of base cabinets and wall cabinets as well. So from a worktop perspective, there was lots of worktop space, and it looked like, they were using a lot of the wall space, shall we say, for hinged base cabinets, wall cabinets, as well as incorporating some towers as well. So at face value, it works well. They've, again, got lots of spaces to incorporate different storage and things like that. But actually, for these particular clients, one, they did want to optimize storage in a case of they wanted to make sure that each cabinet, was really thought about. And two, the layout just did not work for them at all. There just wasn't enough worktop space like near where the ovens are. They thought it looked a bit awkward having the tall ovens tower and then having the Peninsula coming off that sort of, next to it coming out. They also had a step that was halfway in the room. So where that pillar sat, there was a step going all the way across. And again, from a design perspective, you've got to think of different heights and levels for your worktop then if you're incorporating that step. And I'd probably say, I think it was around 100 mil or something like that. And they had good ceiling height. So one of the first things that we did was take out the step, which again is probably one of those costs when you buy a new house. You walk in and you think, oh, that'd be quite easy to do, but sometimes it can be quite tricky. But because we've got the height of the ceiling here, we're all good because you can just, lift the one side of that flooring up and then maybe have a step out into the other room, or however, the flooring guys that you have out sort of think is best from a practical perspective of how to walk around. So that was one thing to navigate. They had a beautiful sort of big window. They had lots of sort of natural light in the space, but we found that because of the shape of the room, we had sections where the light just didn't hit as well. So we had the window sort of where the sink wall is. Opposite that, there wasn't sort of a window onto where, like behind where the dining section was. And then to the right in the other room, there was windows and doors. So actually there was a big section in the kitchen that wasn't lit as well. So that was another thing. And there was just far too many cabinets for what they needed. So we just wanted to lift it, and we wanted to just plan the space better, which is what we've got in the actual design that we've come up with together. So they previously had a contemporary kitchen. So as I mentioned, high glass, bar handles. They wanted to sort of flip that on its head and go for a timeless shaker style kitchen. I believe they had a shaker style in their last property, but I think it was more like the grey tones. But they wanted to keep this really neutral. They wanted to keep it timeless. They wanted to add some modern elements into it, but they were conscious that they didn't want it to date because they know they're going to be there for a good few years. So the shaker style and this sort of neutral colour palette, sort of layering on the different, textures and things like that, really works well if, you are sort of a bit like, oh, I'd love to have a colour, but you do want it to last. So that's why, the putty worked really well, or the sort of the porcelain that we were looking at from different suppliers. So to talk through the layout of this new design then, so on the U-shaped section, we had, rather than having the towers on the right-hand side, we had them on the left. And what we needed to incorporate was a fridge freezer. So they wanted a full height fridge, a full height freezer. And they were happy to stack their ovens, so 2 single ovens. Then they had a corner cabinet from a base perspective. Then they've got their sink wall coming off that. And then on the right-hand side, so opposite where the ovens are, that's where they wanted their hob section. And we wasn't sure how that was going to look. We did a couple of designs where we did add the oven in the same place that it was at the moment, which was just to the right of the hob, but we felt like it just cluttered it up too much. And then also in the new design, having the towers where they're positioned now just allowed for the worktop to carry and flow all the way through. So there wasn't any sort of tall height interruptions. Just as you walk into the kitchen, you'd see the oven straight away in the old position. They were sort of out of the way, so it just didn't make the space feel like enclosed, which is really, I think it just made it look bigger. And one of the biggest things that this client was like really struggling with was how to incorporate this pillar into the space. And it just beforehand just looked really misjointed, where you had the tower and then you had the pillar, and then obviously the Peninsula came off, or some more base cabinets came off that where the seating section was. So it did its job, and like they did incorporate it, but it just didn't flow around. And I think that's something that was really like a stickling point with this client. She was like, I just don't know how I can manage that space and, make that flow better. So what we did was we actually brought the Peninsula forward, so more towards the sort of the window wall, essentially. and then made almost like a corner post, made it look like there was a corner cabinet leading into the base here. And that meant that the plinth continued the same, going all the way around. It meant that the worktop, yes, obviously there's the pillar there, so you had like your upstands and stuff going around that at the top. But from a furniture perspective, it doesn't look any different. There's no wall showing, in between those base cabinets, because we'd pulled it forward. And I mean, we were fortunate in this case with the amount of space in that top section, because it wasn't like we were, space conscious about moving that in a little bit more into the main cooking space. So it worked well from that perspective. And then what that allowed us to do is add one big set of drawers on that peninsula. And then, as I mentioned, just have lots of great storage going around that section. Another element that we wanted to make a focal point, because we wasn't sure where to position the hob at this stage, or during sort of the earlier design stages. And we were thinking, shall we do it on the peninsula? Because then that means that if the oven's still in the same place, it just means that that's less congested on that one side. So then having it on the peninsula means that we could have one of the beautiful vented induction hobs, which are really popular. And, again, it negates the need for a wall-mounted chimney, extractor. So we're going through all these things because they had the space to do it. But as I mentioned, because it was such an awkward layout, and they will say that as well from a room perspective, it was just really difficult to try and pop everything together. But then we realised, and one sort of, one element that I said, and sort of bit of advice I said, shall we pop the oven on the other side? And rather than trying to go for a fridge and then a freezer side by side, create another section behind maybe the seating section where maybe their freezer can go, which again isn't ideal because it's great to have them side by side, but then that just allowed a 600mm width cabinet to have for their stacked single ovens. And I was like, are you happy to have them more out the way? Yes, you will have to move more from one side to the other, but then this means that on where the hob wall is, it just allows you to have a beautiful big focal point, and when we can create maybe a false mantle or something like that. And it was sort of one of those things where she was like, actually, yeah, that might, or they both were that actually might work, we're not sure what it would look like, that sort of thing. And then we thought about, shall we go for, a really big mantle, which is what I call the mantle with legs, which is not the professional way to say it, but I never know the name of it. I'm sure there is a proper name out there, but it's basically when you've got a mantle at the top and then you've got the legs coming down to the worktop. So yeah, mantle with legs. But we just found that, again, having that interruption on the worktop just isn't needed for this design. I think if you want to go for a full mantle, they're great to go for if you want to add more storage into it. So because you can have two wall cabinets, 300mm wall cabinets going down to the worktop, and then that's a great place for spices, or it might be a case of, or olive oils as well, or it might be a case of you want to have the just stud work going across and down, and then having a little cubby hole on the inside. That's really popular as well. But we just thought we didn't need it for this particular design. And the way that the cabinets worked, and because of the pillar being deeper than the average sort of 560 or 600mm sort of cabinet depth, including the worktop and the door, we needed to move that hob run out as well in order to go past that pillar. So I was just like, why don't we incorporate the step up behind the hob that you usually do with a full mantle? We'll just create a beautiful step up behind where the hob section is. And that would be a great place to just stack your favourite herbs. Well, maybe not herbs actually, because it might, from a steam perspective, they won't last very long there, but favourite sort of spices, favourite oils, your salt, pepper and things like that. So you've got everything in your vicinity of, when you're trying to cook, you've got everything sort of at a reaching distance in able to cook properly, because I know that they will use this kitchen as well. They're avid cooks, so that was a really big thing for them to make sure that they've got a really sort of functional and workable space. We also added sort of a gallery rail at the back with some pots and pans sort of hanging off it. Whether they'll do that or not, it's up to them. But again, that's quite a nice way to, you know, hang different bits off that if you've got like a favourite utensil, or maybe it might just be you want to marry that up with the hardware as well. That's quite, you know, something nice, adds a different feature. You see this a lot if you follow sort of like Duval or you know, some of the more traditional, like fairly English styled kitchens. They have those rails behind the hob, you know, a lot, with beautiful hooks on for, you know, just to add, again, another detail, but then still have access to your favourite bits on them. And also they didn't have any wall cabinets as well. So that's something to think about. You've got to have obviously a space for like your cups, you know, glassware, that sort of thing. So having something that's like that, that's behind your hob, that gives you the cooking section, but also it might just allow a little bit more room, you know, in the kitchen as a whole, as opposed to having to use it as a base, you know, in the base cabinet. So that's something to think about. And then what we did was incorporate a stud work coming down from the ceiling. And then this is just something that your fitter can do. You don't necessarily have to have like a separate builder. Usually your fitter would be fully qualified to do this, but it's worth checking this before, you know, they come to site, because you need to make sure that, one, they're happy to do that. Two, if this is being sort of, you know, fitted afterwards, you've got to make sure that, or before, you've got to make sure that everything's in sort of the right alignment and the fitter's happy with, you know, the depths coming out, the way that, how big the corner post is in the corner, and then the cabinets, and just make sure that it's completely in alignment so it's in the right place and not slightly off. But however they want to do that, normally it's just plasterboard at the top, and then that's painted your normal sort of wall colour. And then it's up to you whether you then want sort of a detail coming off it underneath, where you've got a cornice sort of going round the whole section coming down, and then maybe a palmet underneath or a panel. It's whether you want that to be in the furniture colour, so in your kitchen colour, or whether you want that to be all painted in the sort of the wall colour as well. It's popular to do both. I think if you're going for quite a neutral scheme, it's less intrusive going for the, I don't think you'd notice it as much going for the painted finish of the actual doors on that section. So that might be quite a nice touch. Sometimes it can be quite a statement if you're going for like the deeper, darker tones. But equally, it just depends, you know, what your preference is and how much of a focal point you want to make that space. But I think because this is, you know, all neutral, we've done this, you know, the same sort of colour as the furniture. So again, it works really well, and it just means that you only need to sort of order, or through your kitchen supplier, an extra length of cornice if you're going for the more traditional cornices, and, you know, an extra length of, say, like your palmet, or maybe like a, you know, a tall panel, to then be able to fit and secure that underneath there. We've then got a canopy hood sitting inside of that. So again, you've still got that extraction in the space, which I would always recommend. I know some clients are like, you know, we don't need extraction, but I'd just always say it is, you know, it is good to add into the space. And in some cases, in like new builds and stuff, you have to have it from a regs perspective anyway. And I know that's changed recently. So I would definitely, dependent on sort of your location, country, you know, wherever you're based, just double check the regs to see the extraction rate needed within that space. And then either side of the mantle section, we've gone for floating shelves in a, you know, in solid wood oak with nice sort of brackets coming off that. Again, we did try it with a couple of wall cabs. Or I remember I did a design where we did like one with wall cabs and then one with shelves, just to show what that looks like. And I think wall cabinetry would work really well, but they're happy with the amount of storage they've got. They've got all of their base cabinetry to think about. They've got a corner pull out, in the corner, which is a decent size. They've then got a 3 drawer pack underneath where the hob is. They've then got another cupboard to the right hand side of that to match the corner cabinet. And obviously that's not a corner because that's where the pillar is. And then they've got, you know, a beautiful big drawer pack coming off on that Peninsula. So actually in that cooking and prep section, there's actually quite a lot of storage. So they didn't feel like they needed to then incorporate more storage above that as well. And this is always one of those things as well, like, you know, you could always add those wall cabinets in at a different stage. Yes, of course, that means that you'll have to get your carpenter or your fitter back, which is annoying. But sometimes just using the space and actually realising, okay, what do we actually need where? It might be a case of you don't need cabinets either side, but you might just want one sort of lift up system to the left, maybe, of like, so near where like your kettle or your, you know, your hot tap is. And then you've got, you know, that space then for your cups and things. So sometimes it's not trying to perfect it straight away. It's just, it will sort of grow with you and like live with you. And then you can sort of, you know, organise away from there. So that was a really big focal point, the mantle section. And it came off really well. We all felt, which was amazing. Something else to consider as well was on their sink wall, they've got a single cabinet, like sink cabinet, and then they wanted a dishwasher, a bin, and then we added another 300ml cabinet sort of to the left of that. And if you go 300ml cabinet for like a corner cabinet, you can do it, but they are really, really small. So actually, if the opening's only 300ml and then you're going into it and trying to get at the back of that cabinet, it can be quite difficult to get anything, and you feel like you've just lost all of those items at the back forever. So we normally say as a minimum, go for a 400ml width for any sort of base. We call it like a high line corner. And that's purely just so you can get into it. And also that's where the corner pullouts start from, 400ml wide. In this particular design, we actually voided off that corner purely just because we felt having a 300ml normal sized cabinet as a base would just work better. So that's what we decided to do. But something to think about when you are going for like bar handles is keeping all of your bar handles horizontal for all the base cabinets. And this is obviously something that's just a design feature to add, you know, as one of the finishing touches. But what's great about this is it means that if you've got your sink cabinet and then you've got maybe a bin on the left and a dishwasher on the right, it just means that all of your handles are in alignment then at horizontal and they're in the middle, rather than having the dishwasher in the middle, the bin cabinet in the middle, and then the sink cabinet sort of vertically. So it just, again, just adds to that alignment, and especially with it having lots of base cabinets going around this space, again, just having that, you know, bar handle running across just worked really well on this particular design. Then leading into the corner where the ovens are. So we're to the left of the sink now. So this is where originally the fridge freezer was kept. We've got a fridge, then we've got the 2 single ovens. With the 2 single ovens, we've stacked those. So you've got to think about the height that second one is stacked at. I believe these clients have gone for Neff. They have Neff hide and slide for this particular kitchen, purely because then for the top oven, they can slide that door in. And then even if it's slightly higher, because the standard is to have a single oven and then a combination oven, microwave and grill at the top, which is shorter, it's harder to get into. You want to make sure, obviously, you can press the buttons. You want to make sure you can get into the back depth of that top oven, which is really important from a cleaning perspective, you know, and just an upkeep perspective and a usability. So it was really important to make sure that they were happy with those heights, because you've got to think about your 150 plinth, your drawer, and then your single oven, which is 600ml high, and then another single oven again, which is another 600ml high. So we actually went for, I believe it was a 290ml drawer at the bottom, or you can get normally a 360ml drawer high at the bottom in UK sizes for like your mainstream sort of modular systems, essentially. I would always opt for a high-sided drawer at the bottom. So I always promote sort of the Blum Legwood box drawers, purely because having high sides around it, if you've got any sort of trays or anything like that, you can stack them either horizontally, on top of each other, or what you could do is keep that for your deep trays at the bottom, like your roasting dishes maybe, and then at the top you can sometimes add vertical cabinet material in the hinged cupboard at the top if you're going for hinged, and then slide in your trays from there. That's really popular at the moment. You've probably seen a lot of socials with that as like one of their hooks to lure you into that account. So that's something to think about. On this particular design, again, we put the handle at the top horizontally, and I believe we did that as a lift up in the end. So again, from a usability perspective, it's just a lot easier. The fridge freezer, or the fridge, we put 2 handles on that just so obviously it looks the same. And then we've kept the bottom door the same height as the base cabinets going round. So that's really important. Again, it just keeps that sort of consistency throughout the whole design. And something to note, which is if you listen to the show a lot, you'll know this is one of my favourite ways to use one of the awkward corners that you get when you've got sort of your tower cabinets. Leading into the corner, you normally have, say, like a 620mm space, and then you have your worktop coming off that, which is the sink run in this case. My favourite thing to incorporate is a single bifold, so go into the right-hand side. And that's purely just, when I say bifold, it's 2 smaller width doors. So say it'll be, say, like 2 300 width doors, and then it leads on a single bifold to the right-hand side, so where the wall is. And then if you put sort of sockets, this could almost be like a little breakfast station, or it could just be like almost like an appliance garage. So if you've got any, if you're a keen baker, you've got any big mixers, a coffee machine. This was something actually I remember on this design, that they had a coffee machine that just had to go somewhere. This would be a great place for that. Like, yes, it'd be awkward to use it inside of the cabinet. So naturally, if you want a breakfast station, it's going to be easier because you're standing directly in front of it. But in this case, you can just cantilever sort of the bifolds over to the right, pull out the coffee machine, still on the worktop because there's never a base on those dressers. Use said appliance. You're not having to, strain and pick it up from a base cabinet or get it from a cupboard or walk it over from a pantry. It's all at sort of worktop height, so you can actually use that appliance close to where that appliance garage is. Wash it up, pop that away, shut the door, and then it all looks beautifully, integrated from there. So that was one thing and one way of adding the coffee machine in this particular space. The next design feature was the Peninsula. So where the seating section is, we incorporated a big drawer pack there. I think personally, drawer packs are always better than hinged cabinets, but equally from a price perspective, they're obviously going to be a lot more. So you might have to be careful with, how many you're adding in. You might have to be mindful of how many drawer cabinets you're adding in. If it's a case of, from a cost perspective, everything's coming in a little bit too high, that's one way to reduce your cost. And then if from an accessibility perspective, you're still thinking, oh, I wish I had drawers, say, in that hinged cabinet, what you can do is add an internal drawer in there if you want to. So it still looks like a hinged door. And then you could just add an internal drawer at the top or 2 internal drawers, and then it works, from there. So that's something to think about. Well, at the back of this Peninsula, it's obviously around the pillar section. They were sort of wanted to have sort of 2 worktops. So we had the quartz worktop going all the way round, and we went for a sort of a marble effect, sort of light quartz, which is very popular. But again, it just suited the neutral tone really well. And then on the Peninsula, they wanted to add sort of like a step-up section in like, a solid wood, which we use sort of like an oak here. So we've almost done like a wraparound where you've got the top section sitting at the same height as the furniture. And then you've got the sides coming down, so 2 waterfall ends. So if you're coming into the main door and then walking round the seating section to come round, you see the wood grain going down. And if you're coming from a different part of the house, so like the lounge, going through sort of like the awkward second room to then come into the new kitchen, again, you'll see the wood grain there. And then what we did in that particular section on the right-hand side, which is the pillar side of that wall, is add a wine cooler, which again just works because if they're then adding a dining room into the other shaped section that I mentioned earlier, or we've incorporated like a little reading nook just behind that peninsula, again, it's in front of a beautiful big window, so that would be a really nice place just to sit down. But it just means that it's all sort of in keeping and in the right place. And also if you're hosting and you've got guests over, having your wine cooler at the back of an island or on a peninsula like this is always a really great shout, or, is really popular from a choice perspective, because it just makes it look a little bit different as well. And if you probably want to show off your wine cooler, they're always quite nice things to, sort of look at. It's always a talking point. So that's an easy way of incorporating a wine cooler within your space that isn't actually affecting the main part of the storage. So they wanted seating for two at a high level, and then they were looking to have a dining room section in the other part of the space, rather than trying to have the main seating section and overcrowd where the main part of the kitchen is. We then was looking at, shall we add cabinets at the back? But what we decided to do with this particular design is add a larder cabinet sort of to the left-hand side of the worktop. And then that could, in this design, you could have a fridge freezer where the oven tower is, if you're happy just to have it as a 70-30 split. And then this could be like a whole big breakfast station here. Or you could do it where you have, say, like your freezer, so your less used appliance over in this section. And then maybe have like a space tower or have like internal drawers or something in another larder. So again, it looks like a piece of furniture because it's like standalone, but it's just an extra space that you can use for storage. And we were really fortunate with this layout because we could keep that depth at standard. Like we didn't have to reduce that depth in order to allow enough room to sort of walk around the breakfast bar area or anything like that. But you can still do that. You can reduce your depths of like your larders and things. You've just got to, if you've obviously got to pull out inside of there or drawers, you've got to think you can't reduce it when you've got that in. But if you're going for shelved, like adjustable shelved, or maybe you've got a carpenter that's working with you and can bespoke something for you on the inside at a reduced depth for a little bit more storage if you need to. So that would be perfect for dry goods storage as well, just having it out of the way. If you like to bulk buy, just popping your tins, etc. in there, then you can pull them all out, move over to where the hob section is, and then you're good to go and you've got everything ready. So that was another design feature. Something to note with this, and I think this is where it doesn't actually add any more to the cost to do. But again, from a design perspective, it just looks more freestanding. We actually pulled that cabinet off the wall, so we didn't actually have it. If you just have like a standalone larder on a wall, it's always nice to like either centralise that or move it away from the left-hand wall a little bit or the right-hand wall a little bit, just to make sure that, you can see the T&G panels both sides. Maybe you've got room to put like a plant to the left in the corner, and then you've got your larder cabinet. It just makes, even though that you're having the furniture, from the kitchen supplier and it's all the same, it just sort of differentiates it slightly. So you've just, it's a standalone piece of furniture as opposed to needing to, feel like it's all attached and have like a filler or something on the one wall. We also, on the design, added a bit of paneling and stuff at the back, which you can see on a couple of the designs, which I'll pull up on YouTube if you're watching. And that was just, again, a way to add a little bit of colour. So having sort of shaker paneling coming up on the actual wall itself, sort of midway in maybe like a deeper, darker colour, and then having neutral sort of walls at the top going all the way round. It just made that section look really stand out. But we'll see whether they've incorporated that, because it's actually been fitted this week, this kitchen. So I'm super excited to see it when it's all sorted. But yeah, it was a beautiful project to work on. And the key design features, I think, were things that I would imagine a lot of you are trying to overcome as well. Like, you're unsure whether to go for the mantle, you're unsure whether to go for like the standard standalone sort of, canopy cabinet. You're unsure the best place to put your ovens because you're probably fighting over function with like the placement of it. but then also from a design perspective, you're wanting that flow going all the way through. It might be a case of you've got a really, particular shaped room like this one as well, and you just are like, Faye, I've just got no idea. You can't sort of see the vision, which is fine, because that's what us as kitchen designers are here for. But it was really nice to actually see the reaction and hear the feedback from when we got to this design stage, because they were like, we just never thought we'd get there. Like, we never thought we would look at this space. They just saw the original blue walls, the glossy, cabinetry, the lighting hanging from everywhere, the step, like different things. They just saw all of the bad bits, which I think you do see when it's your space and you're loathing that kitchen. It's difficult to try and see, the end goal, especially when you're moving in, because they've only moved into this property a couple of weeks ago, and there was scope to try and actually move in once all this work was sorted. So again, that's very stressful because you haven't quite lived there, you haven't quite used the space. But equally, you want it to all be sorted so you haven't got the dust and no worktops, nowhere to actually cook and things. So I can see why you all avoid it, in fairness. But the end result is totally worth it. So I'm super excited to see how this kitchen has turned out in real life. We will keep you up to date on socials and show you how it's all finished. As I always say, if it's a case of you've got an upcoming project at the moment and you want some new eyes on the space, because sometimes that's all that's needed, or a professional sort of viewpoint, I'm more than happy to help. So alongside the Love Your Kitchen podcast, I have a freelance design business called Faye Newman Design, which is of course my name. And it's basically I set up the business as a way to help guide you through the stressful renovation stage, especially for a kitchen. It's the biggest or second biggest purchase. There's so many different parameters, different style choices, different colours, different mechanisms, different hinges, like different everything that you have to think about. And with sort of years of experience, I help clients make the right choices for them. So not for me, I don't supply anything. So I like to keep it, unbiased. I can only I recommend, the network that I've built over the years as well with certain suppliers and things like that, just to make sure that at the end we get the reaction from a design perspective that these guys, gave me. It was amazing. And also that, the end result is just the dream kitchen that they've always wanted. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's helped you in some way. But yeah, reach out at www.fayenewmandesign.com or just DM me on socials if you've got any questions, any topics you want us to talk about on the show, or if you are, sort of at the end of your tether with a design that you're working on at the moment and you need help. I'm more than happy to help from there. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.